Part 2. Local Self-Government and the Atlantic Trade. 1619, 1770s one summer. 1619, a meeting room in Jamestown and a ship's hold off the coast. In July 1619 at Jamestown, Virginia elected English colonists gathered in a wooden church and opened the first session of the House of Burgesses, the earliest representative legislature in English North America. They debated tobacco taxes, frontier defense, and public morals. The rules sounded small beer prices, common granaries, compulsory work hours, but they were the first shape of local self-rule people choosing delegates to manage their own affairs. Later that summer, a Dutch-Portuguese privateer anchored near Point Comfort. On board were 20 and odd Africans, among the earliest recorded in Virginia. In the decades that followed, coerced labor, including enslaved Africans and indentured servants, flowed into the tidewater. The new order of labor carried two moral colors, voting freely in the meeting hall and bondage in the fields. Two New England town meetings, the habit of self-management in Plymouth, 1620, and then Massachusetts Bay, 1630. New England villages organized town meetings. Freemen voted on roads, fences, night watch, parish taxes, and the division of common lands. The minutes recorded details: who left a fence broken and paid a fine, who skipped watch and owed compensation. These small ordinances created an invisible infrastructure, habits of deliberation, consensus, and record-keeping that later soaked into every level of government. Harvard College, 1636, the College of William and Mary, 1693, and Yale, 1701, trained ministers and officials. Literacy served scripture, but also commerce. On the Charles River, the Boston waterfront stacked white pine planks and barrels of dried cod. On the James boats of tobacco rode the tide to the sea. 3. A young network of ports. Boston, Newport, New Amsterdam. Philadelphia, Boston in the 1630s-40s rose on shipbuilding light, durable New England white pine that took a plank well. Newport, Rhode Island, soon became a center for rum and Atlantic trade. Some merchants later entered the transatlantic slave trade. New Amsterdam, taken by the English in 1664 and renamed New York, sat at the mouth of the Hudson, a hinge for furs and grain reaching the interior. William Penn's Philadelphia, 1682, founded on Quaker toleration, quickly became the busiest mid-Atlantic port, flour, timber, flaxseed, and salted meat out. Ironware, woolens, and hardware in. In the Carolinas and Georgia, rice and indigo became staples built on enslaved labor and the hydraulic skills of Africans from Senegambia and Sierra Leone. The South grew rich on plantations. The North grew rich on ship's joinery, barrels, cordage, and marine insurance. 4. The Navigation Acts, trade rules, and the art of working around them. Parliament sought customs and control through Navigation Acts, 1651, 1660, 1663, and after. Colonial staples, sugar, tobacco, naval stores, indigo had to move in English ships through English ports, paying English duties. Ocean winds rewarded flexible practice. Colonial merchants complied just enough and evaded just enough, touching at Barbados, Jamaica, Madeira, or the Azores, and redocumenting cargo. A culture of accounts, paperwork, and bargaining grew alongside Puritan ethics, receipts, bills of lading, customs bonds. The traffic formed a triangle. New England cod fed Caribbean plantations. Molasses came back to be distilled into rum. Rum sailed to West Africa to purchase captives. Captives crossed to the Caribbean and mainland. From there, sugar, indigo, rice, and tobacco went to Britain. Not every ship sailed every leg, but the network of ship owners, insurers, factors, distillers, planters, and bankers, and their letters of credit was the backbone of prosperity. 5. Conflict and alliance, the Pequot War King, Philip's War, and the Covenant Chain. Within the trade web lay a human frontier. The Pequot War, 1636-1638, ended in a devastating defeat for the Pequot and a redistribution of land. King Philip's War, 1675-1676, Metacom of the Wampanoag against New England, burned towns and proportionate to population, became one of the deadliest conflicts in colonial history. Afterward, New England tightened palisades, musters, and taxes. Around New York, the English built the Covenant Chain alliances with the Iroquois Confederacy that were both commercial furs and military, countering the French and their native allies. In Pennsylvania, William Penn sought consent with the Lenape through treaties and public purchases, helping Philadelphia skirt some early confrontations. 6. Selective toleration and the policing of morals. Maryland's Toleration Act, 1649, protected Christian worshippers with limits, while Massachusetts enforced blue laws. Sunday commerce bans dress codes and fines for drunkenness. Quakers suffered in Boston but found refuge in Pennsylvania. Rhode Island sheltered dissenters. Religious variety did not erase tension, but it created a legal capacity to coexist, a non-material asset that kept trade steady. 7. Printing newspapers and a trial that set a marker for free speech. By the early 1700s, presses ran in Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. Benjamin Franklin arrived in Philadelphia in 1723, made the Pennsylvania Gazette, and wrote Poor Richard's Almanac, 1732-1758. In New York, 1735, the printer John Peter Zenger was tried for seditious libel. A jury acquitted him after Andrew Hamilton argued that truth should defend political criticism. The case did not rewrite English law overnight, but it planted a milepost for press freedom in the colonies. Franklin later served as joint postmaster and then postmaster general for the colonies 1753, rationalizing routes from Boston to Williamsburg, placing mile markers, and improving schedules and rates. Faster letters manifests and bills of exchange lower transaction costs for trade. 8. Salutary neglect, a gap in power that trained self-rule. From the late 1600s to mid-1700s, London often neglected the colonies' salutary neglect. Royal governors, short of salaries and dependent on colonial appropriations, bargained with local assemblies. Boston's town meetings kept deciding road funds. The House of Burgesses still set tobacco policy and local taxes. Quaker Pennsylvania tried to avoid war and preferred negotiation. The default habit took shape. Public problems were handled by the public locally, not by orders from afar. 9. A consumer boom before a political revolution. Between roughly 1730 and 1770, British goods printed cottons, Staffordshire ceramics, Sheffield cutlery, tea sugar. Window glass flooded the market. Catalogues and advertisements taught taste and polite society. Middle households bought teacups, tall clocks, and wallpaper. Consumption became a social language. To pour tea was to participate in British civilization, even as tea later became a symbol of protest. 10. Slavery plantations south and a presence in the north. From the Chesapeake to the Carolinas, enslaved Africans became the core workforce. Virginia's 1705 slave codes hardened hereditary bondage. South Carolina built dikes and canals for rice cultivation using enslaved hydraulic knowledge. Indigo earned parliamentary bounties as a substitute for French dye. Enslaved people also lived in New York, Newport, and Boston as domestic dockside and workshop labor, while northern merchants financed, insured, and transported ships in the transatlantic slave trade. The fortunes of many were entangled with a moral knot that would haunt politics and religion for generations. 11. Awakening faith and a marketplace of souls. In the 1730s, 1740s, the Great Awakening swept the colonies. George Whitefield preached outdoors. Jonathan Edwards penned sinners in the hands of an angry God. Crowds wept on coarse wool sleeves. The movement split congregations, yet opened markets for books, newspapers, itinerant sermons, and donation networks. It lowered the threshold for common people to speak in public. Skills of oratory, crowd management, and mobile printing became civic tools, later used in debates over taxes and rights. 12 law courts and juries, the habit of litigation. Each county had courts for debt, land disputes, and petty crimes. Juries were neighbors. English precedent was cited. Lawyers were few, but the habit of litigation grew. Seizures of smuggled cargo and suits on unpaid bills taught merchants to draft tighter contracts, buy insurance, and include arbitration clauses. The rule of law was not a slogan. It was a survival skill of port cities. 13 roads and post-tying ports to the interior. The post road from Boston to Williamsburg was straightened, measured, and marked. Post riders changed horses at taverns. Packet boats ran the coast. Franklin tested schedules against real wind and tide, a primitive operation science. Mail arrived quicker. Silver prices converged across ports, and bills of exchange circulated more smoothly. 14 hard borders of soft money. The colonies lacked coin. Many issued paper money bills of credit from the 1690s onward. London pushed back with currency acts. Merchants learned multi-currency accounting, Spanish silver, English shillings, local paper and bills drawn on London houses. A literate sailor could not only keep a log, he could read an exchange table. 15. From meadows into the woods, Scots-Irish and the back country. From the 1730s, Scots-Irish migrants moved into the Appalachians, homesteading the Shenandoah and Piedmont. They brought Presbyterian elders, large kin groups, and fierce self-help. County courts were distant. Promises and family reputation worked as notarization, a frontier credit economy. 16. Clouded duties and the art of civil protest. After the 7 Years' War in North America, 1754-1763, the Crown sought revenue, the Sugar Act, 1764, Stamp Act, 1765, and Townshend Duties, 1767. At first, this was a quarrel over finance and authority, not independence. Ports protested by procedure petitions, non-importation agreements refusing to sign manifests. The Sons of Liberty emerged. John Hancock's sloop Liberty was seized in 1768. In Admiralty courts, lawyers attacked general warrants, writs of assistance. Local assemblies and town meetings became the stage for arguments about power and tax. 17. A surge of print and public argument. The Boston Gazette, Pennsylvania Journal, and New York Journal ran open letters and essays on no taxation without representation. Cheap pamphlets spread through taverns and fish markets. Readers declaimed to crowds. Words ran ahead of bullets for years as people practiced speaking, writing, listening, and rebuttal. 18. A morning on the wharf, goods papers, people Boston early, 1760s stacks of cod barrels, white pine planks for fast schooners, axe handles and newly laid rope. On a clerk's table sat bills of lading manifests and customs bonds. Portuguese sailors, Scottish carpenters, Welshmen, and free black labourers loaded cargo. In Newport, the stills boiled rum. In Philadelphia, Brandywine mills ground flour. In Charleston, rice bags piled high. In New York, furs and dyestuffs changed hands. 19 houses, dinner tables, and an English taste. A middling family in Philadelphia bought a British tea set, Staffordshire plates, Sheffield knives, and printed calico. A fireplace mantel held engravings and a world map. Supper offered wheat bread, butter, marmalade, and tea. British goods signalled fashion. Sales signalled prosperity. Economic and cultural ties to the metropolis thickened, and because they thickened, disputes later cut deeper. 22. Contrary winds, rule of law and inequality. Law courts and juries aided commerce, yet legal inequity stood out. Enslaved people and most women lacked political rights. Prime lands concentrated in large estates. Artisans and sailors were exposed when prices swung. In New York, 1741, a wave of panic over an alleged plot led to hasty trials and harsh punishments, leaving scars in civic memory. Local self-rule empowered many, but not evenly. 21. A toolkit of trade. By the 1770s, a generation of merchants could read a chart, measure, tide, assess insurance risk, swap currencies, write letters of credit, draft penalty clauses for late delivery, choose routes that avoided privateers, negotiate with customs officers, and pick governing law for contracts. A paper civilization stood beside the church-going one. When tea became a symbol in 1773, they knew how to boycott, raise guarantee funds, and mobilize town votes, the techniques learned from local self-rule and the Atlantic marketplace. 22. Why 16, 1917-70s determined what came next. Bottom-up institutions. House of Burgesses, town meetings, county courts trained people to bargain over public matters. The Atlantic network taught reading, measuring, contracting, and risk. Print and post turned debate into collective action. Revival religion trained orators and organizers. Slavery's shadow entwined prosperity with injustice. And salutary neglect taught the colonies to manage themselves. Together, these made a political economic character able to sail a ship and argue a case to trade and to vote. 23. 3 closing vignettes. Boston, 1764. In Faneuil Hall, merchants and artisans debate the Sugar Act, with ledgers open. A tax on molasses means layoffs in the rum stills. Without revenue, London credits might fail. Local self-rule here looked like applied economics. Philadelphia, 1753. Franklin reviews a post map, pencils distances and fair tides, and cuts a day from the schedule. An hour saved becomes profit for merchants and speed for the public sphere. Law needs paper, paper needs post, post needs management. Charleston, 1768. White rice bags lift aboard. Nearby new arrivals are recorded as living cargo. A planter draws a bill, a merchant notes an insurance premium. Prosperity and injustice walk the same wharf. Conclusion. From 1619 to the 1770s, along Britain's North American seaboard, two currents ran together: local self-government and the Atlantic trade. The first taught people to meet, vote, levy, and adjudicate, and to believe public matters should be decided by the public. The second taught them to reckon risk, keep ledgers, honour delivery dates, and trust that wealth rests on law, credit, and information. Merged, these currents produced a citizen merchant able to organize boycotts and manage cargo, to write pamphlets and contracts. When tax disputes hardened in the late 1760s and early 1770s, they already possessed the tools for a revolution of words and later of arms.